name is Igor Markelov. I am a DeFi architect in Panther Protocol. And today the topic of my presentation is private data sharing to enable compliance in DeFi. But first, let's start about compliance in traditional finance. What are the main requirements to be compliant in TradFi? So first requirement is to have KYC. So you need to know your customer. So you need to verify customer identity, to collect and validate identification documents, do a risk profiling of customers. You also need to do anti-money laundering. You need to implement transaction monitoring. You need to perform suspicious activity reporting and record keeping for some period of time. And as well as perform risk assessment of those transactions. And there is also a requirement to have capital to prevent failures during some financial crisis or to cover risk associated with financial systems. There is also a reporting requirement, so you need to do a regular financial statements, and also you need to perform involuntary disclosure without explicit agreement of the user in your system. For example, if there is an order from the court and they oblige you to do that. There is also operational requirements, so you need to be cyber secure. You also need to implement consumer protection, so you need to be compliant with GDPR laws or, for example, with CCPA. You need also to do trading and market conduct, so ensure best practices of your execution. And of course, you need to have licenses and your employees needs to have certificates. And specifically today, the focus of my talk is reporting requirements, and I also will cover KYC and AML. And especially how we do implement it in Panther Protocol. But let's first start what is Panther Protocol. So we enable privacy for regulatory compliance for licensed operators. And in terms of technical requirements, we have the following. So we are having multi-asset shielded pool with unified Merkle tree, unified of accounts UTXO and assets UTXO. We also share anonymity set across different supported networks. So Merkle trees on different networks are synchronized. And to verify customizable rules, we use Grove 16 protocol. And what about components? So with the main components of the protocol, so is the account. We also have KYC and KYT attestation. We have a notion of zones inside of the protocol and zone operators, and we also do data escrow. So I'll talk about each component in detail. So what is an account? It's the same as in banking account you have. It's account that contains your information that allows you to do a transaction. It can contain some, for example, cryptographic keys or expiration dates or some limits of your operation. In Panther Protocol, we do not store any private information inside the account, so only information required to perform transactions. So every transaction, as I said before, we use account UTXO, and every transaction, it spends the account UTXO, and then it creates new account UTXO with updated limits and other information encounters. So on every transaction, user proves that he owns this UTXO using Grove 16 protocol, and we also assume that one user has one account. And how we do that? We perform KYC, so which stands for Know Your Customer. So we have this KYC is performed during activation of your account or renewal, and we use third-party service that is trust provider for us. This third-party service, it stores personal information, and it's managed by this provider. What exact information needs to be used for specific customer or zone is specified by zone operators. And if everything is okay, trust providers issues EDDSA signature that is later verified in circuits. We also perform KYT. On every transaction, user has to submit their KYT. So we have third-party services that is responsible for KYT of the transactions. What inside of this, there are rules that are specified by zone operators that I will talk about next slide, but these rules can define, for example, deposit and withdrawal limits, some internal limits, like one transaction cannot be more, let's say, than $100, and some inter-zones rules. So one of the zone operators here can have different zones and define, okay, you can transfer from one zone to the other one, but not backward. And if everything goes well, again, this trust provider issues EDDSA signature that is verified in circuits. Those trust providers, they have access, of course, to this private data because they need to know, for example, what is the token of the transfer, what is the amount, and source and destination address. And finally, who are the zone and zone operators? So zone operators, it's the licensed entities in our protocol, so they define some zones inside the shielded pool, and one zone operator can have different zones with different set of rules, and he or she defines KYC and KYT rules inside of each zone. It can also define transaction limits and inter-zone transfer permissions. So every transaction is tied to specific zones, and for the external observer, it's indistinguishable where the transaction happened. And finally, to be compliant with reporting requirements, we have data escrow. Data escrow specifically designed to enable involuntary data disclosure. When user is not cooperating and we have, for example, order from the court and we need to show some specific transaction and they needs to be disclosed. So for that purpose, on every transaction, the user encrypts private information of this transaction using public keys of data escrow manager. Then we verify this encryption inside the circuits and save this transaction on chain. Because this is the public inputs, encrypted information is the public input of the circuit, so basically this information is saved on chain. Also to remove incentive from the data escrow to open every transaction, we can implement some multi-party computational simple MPC that will share the keys of data escrow manager, for example, with zone operator or KYT provider or even a DAO. A little bit about technical implementation. So for data escrow, we're using LGML on elliptic curve. So I'll talk about algorithm, how we do that. So on every transaction, user, before making a transaction, basically creates the random, ephemeral random, and computes ephemeral public key. Then he computes some secret using data escrow public key. This secret is basically point on elliptic curve, and then in order to encrypt the message, which is point on elliptic curve, he adds this secret to the point. And as a result, you produce C1 and C2, one of which is encrypted point, and the second one, ephemeral public key. And this encryption is checked inside zero-knowledge circuits. So in order to decrypt that, you go in a backwards direction. So you have C1 and C2 is your public inputs. So data escrow manager takes his private keys and computes the shared secret, which is a point on elliptic curves. And then just by negating this point and subtracting from the encrypted point on elliptic curve, he gets the original message. Okay, this works for the points on elliptic curves, right? But private information, it's not only points, it can be also some scalar data, and mostly it's scalar data. So we also need some way how we need to convert this scalar data to points in order to be able to encrypt them. So we use so-called encoding, scalar encoding, where we split large scalar numbers to 32 byte chunks in order to ensure that we can basically reconstruct these colors. And we take these 32-bit chunks and multiply it by point generator, and get the point on elliptic curve. So when you decode, you always sure that you can go back, because you can basically search through the whole space of 32-bit numbers and finally find your point on elliptic curve. And the simple MPC, as I said before, so to remove incentive from the data escrow manager to decrypt every transaction that happened on chain, so you can use this simple MPC. So one of the public arguments can be encrypted further using the keys of, for example, Zone or DAO managers, and then using the same approach with Algamal encryption to put it as a public signal in the transaction. And in order to decrypt, so if you want to decrypt specific transactions, you first need to ask Zone Manager or DAO to decrypt these parameters for you, for escrow manager, and then only then escrow manager can do the rest. And this is just a summary slide how the whole process works. So we start with the private data that has colors and encrypting and EC points, points on elliptic curve. Then we use color encoding for converting scalars to the points. We encrypt these points and then use MPC to distribute the keys. And all of those is verified in zero-knowledge circuits. And the reverse process, again, it's very simple, basically the same steps, but backwards. Okay, so to sum up, we in Panther Protocol enable involuntary disclosure via private data sharing. So we use zero-knowledge circuits, and we encrypt private information using Algamal encryption. So we use a simple MPC to remove incentive to decrypt all transactions from data escrow manager. And as I said before, we utilize zero-knowledge circuits to verify encryption integrity. So all transactions stored on chain, so it's always available. So a little bit about ongoing work. So we also want to improve scalar encoding. So we would like to make for data escrow manager to do decoding, for example, some to be computationally expensive. So to do so, to make sure that he doesn't decrypt all the transaction, and yeah, basically for that. And we also want to create selective disclosures, so when the user can disclose specific information, because in the example before I showed the decryption of the whole private data. But for the user, it's not always necessary. You can just decrypt or verify that some specifics of your transaction. For example, if it were lower than some limit. And finally, we are launching Canary Network on Polygon this month. So please, everyone, welcome to test it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Igor. It is no small feat to be launching on testnet, so kudos to you guys for that.